Hey Josh, Tommy Gibbons here. Thanks for your responses in both forums here in week one. Good work in both of them. I love just the kind of critical engagement, wrestling with things here, especially in the second response forum, but also kind of interacting critically with the different options that we're getting in the commentaries there for forum one. So keep that up. Great stuff. I wanted to kind of get us off hopefully to a good start in week one with a video reply to you. Gives me a chance to say hello and kind of get the conversation going. I will mention too, because it's just crossing my mind, that I did see your email that I think week three of the course or so, you're going to be in Costa Rica, if I remember right. And I will try to get you the material for week three ahead of time so that you can, try to post it while you have internet access, even before the time that it's due. And if for some reason things don't work out and you have to add stuff when you get back, don't worry too much about that. We'll figure it out. Anyway, back to Romans. Um, I like that you're sitting patiently there with Habakkuk in the first forum, and then have come back to it here, recognizing that there is, um, something to the kind of political nature of what Habakkuk is complaining about, as well as what Habakkuk is hoping for, and therefore what this life that he comes to hear from God as a promise. The just by faith will live. That life has a kind of political character to it. But I think, as you're rightly pointing out here as well, in our time, we tend to think of the political in pretty, reductive terms, as if it were only about electoral processes, elected government, something like that. Whereas, the needs that Habakkuk is crying out to God about, hoping for God to meet, are very holistic needs. There's certainly, conditions of life for a person, for a community on the earth, um, but they're multidimensional, and so that'll be a challenge probably throughout this class. Is for some reasons, obviously, I want to kind of play up the political edge of Paul's gospel, its anti imperial force in Romans. But at the same time, I don't want to set up a kind of, oversimplified notion of what the political nature of Paul's gospel is or something. So we'll keep talking about that. But I love what you're kind of coming up with here in both forums, and my sense is that um, you know what Habakkuk says is about the faith of the just person as a kind of generic figure. Um, it's a faith that is itself predicated, you might say, on the faith or the trustworthiness of God, and that's why I think the faith or the faithfulness of God deserves some consideration here, because at the end of the day, what inspires the faith of the just person is the faithfulness, the trustworthiness of Israel's God. And so the way that that faith of God gives rise to the faith of the human does seem to me to be the kind of dynamics that Paul is attributing to Habakkuk. And then I would say that's open to a kind of messianic understanding, because the fullness of Israel's life on its horizon for Habakkuk is finally what you might say is the revelation of the faith of God and the faith of the human in their fullness in one person, the person of the Messiah. So that's kind of how I see Paul kind of um, building the argument of Romans. I don't think what Paul means at this early stage is kind of manifestly clear. It really does depend on the unfolding of the rest of the letter. So in some ways, my interpretation is like reading back into this crucial juncture, this kind of thesis statement of the letter what I take the rest of the letter to teach. And so we'll obviously have to be testing that as we go through the argument of Romans. What else did I want to say to you? I I think just you're tracking, I think, with a tension that Eliot is trying to strike, and it's this um, recognition that Paul in Romans does not call for the audience to rise up and attempt in a kind of summary, violent way to throw off Roman rule, and instead urges a kind of subjection even to um, Roman imperial authorities, which is kind of a scandal, I think, to a lot of us today for understandable reasons. And sometimes that's been exploited by Christians who are in power or friendly to those who are in power to kind of justify Christian subordination to bad government. I don't think we want to do that. But Eliot is trying to find a way, I think, to articulate how Paul's anti imperial gospel does not fight the empire the same way the empire fights its enemies. Instead, it recognizes God's work in hand, even in very corrupt regimes like the Chaldeans for Habakkuk, right? He's horrified by them, and yet he's told by God that God is somehow at work in these terrible, cruel Chaldean forces that are oppressing Israel. And Paul seems to say something similar, that the Romans, that the recipients of the letter, their calling involves recognizing God's rule is at work, even in the imperial structures of power. And this is not something they're supposed to settle for. It's not their full future, but it does influence how they're to go about bearing witness to this anti imperial gospel about Jesus, the Jewish Lord. So it turns out, I think, that Eliot doesn't get quite there yet, but what I would say Paul ends up arguing in Romans is that um, the way Christian discipleship approaches oppressive power um, is sort of in tune with Jesus's way of confronting oppressive powers. And this means not simply um, mimicking or replicating the violent, oppressive ways of imperial authorities. It means bringing them down with the peculiar power of the gospel. And we'll be studying, I think, throughout Romans how that happens. As it turns out, a lot of it involves the power that is embodied, generated, disseminated by communities of people that refuse to order their lives according to imperial norms or dictates, but instead order their lives with others as a community, with their neighbors, in a way that is responsive to the lordship of Jesus. And this has the effect of undermining Roman hegemony, Roman control of people's lives. So, again, we'll get more into it as the summer wears on, but great to have you in the class and looking forward to more conversation throughout the summer. Good to meet you too, Josh. Thanks again for your work here in week one.